So we're here to talk about the 7 habits of customer-obsessed firms. You might notice if you participate in our previous webinars that our logo is just a little bit different today, and so I'll make a comment about that and kind of tell you why in just a second. So I am the facilitator for today's session. I am Tom Wadelton. I am one of the full-time virtual CFOs at Summit CPA Group. So to tell you just a little bit about Summit CPA Group, since 2004, we've been providing CFO and back office services to firms. Back almost 10 years ago, we went fully distributed as a firm. So all of our team members work remotely, gives us a huge amount of flexibility for employees, and then our clients are also all over the country, and many of them are also international. And then Summit CPA has recently joined Anders CPA and Advisors. So the 2 firms have merged. That's why Summit is now being seen as a division of Anders CPA and Advisors. That happened in early April. We're very excited about this merger and what it can do for us. So a couple of housekeeping things as we get started today. So today's session does qualify for 1 credit. You do need to attend the entire 50-minute session. We do have 3 polling questions, so we need people to answer all 3 of those questions during the session. Please do use the question function. That's the best way to interact with us. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll try to answer as many of those questions during the session. But as you hear things that just make you curious or want to make comments or other things around that, please go ahead and use that. That's a great way to get information. If you complete the CPE credit, you'll get the CPE certificate. That will be mailed out as long as replay slides, emails, and things like that. Okay, so housekeeping out of the way. 2 presenters today. So Kelly Schuknecht is our Director of Marketing for Summit CPA Group. And then also Meng-Xi is the Head of Customer Success and Advocacy at AskNicely, which is a product that we use at Summit CPA Group.
Hi, everyone. As Tom mentioned, my name's MX. I am Head of Customer Success here at AskNicely. We provide customer experience and customer feedback collection software, but we've also spent the last couple of years really trying to understand what makes customer experience, right? And so I'll go into that in a little bit. If there's $1 million slide, this is probably it. I'll get into that in a little bit, but first of all, for me, please don't let the accent fool you. I am based in the US. We're here in Portland, Oregon. I hail originally from Australia, and my background is probably non-traditional for a tech startup. I started off as a lawyer and decided that's really not where I wanted my life to be, and then moved into management consulting, focusing on customer experience and go-to-market. So that's what got me interested in the space, and I joined AskNicely about 2.5 years ago, really helping spearhead one of our new frontline platforms, which I'm really excited about because I think it's been really validated with a lot of the research we've been doing in the market, and speaking to customers like Kelly and Tom and some of the CPA to understand how they go about measuring and improving customer experience. So please jump in. I love questions. I don't like to hear my own voice that much, so I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. But going straight into it, I think one of the things we've learned over the years is customer experience is becoming more and more important, which is great. But it's not just about holistic systemic changes. It's not just about how many people you have manning the phones. It's about the employees who are delivering that customer experience, right? Your customers perceive your company, your brand, based on the interactions they have with your product and all that, but especially with the people that represent your brand. And all of our research has shown, and so has market research, that it's really, if you can drive a great employee experience, then they will provide a better customer experience. A better customer experience means greater loyalty, and that means more referrals, more reviews, and customers who stay longer and spend more and who tell their friends. As I'm sure a lot of other marketing experts will tell you, it's expensive to get a new customer. It is much more efficient and effective to retain the customers you already have. And this is why we try to paint this out as a bit of a linear picture of how do we focus on the customer experience by really elevating and focusing on those who are delivering that, the employees. That's what we mean by EX equals CX equals loyalty. And NPS itself started off with a Bain & Company research paper and Fred Rydberg there, and they're now moving on to what they call NPS 3.0. What is the ROI of NPS? And that's really about this. What does CX actually mean to your business overall? And now we can quantify that. So research has shown that a promoter, so someone who gives you a 9 or a 10, is 4 times as likely to refer you to a friend and bringing you business than someone who gives you an 8 or below. So getting people to really believe in your brand pays for itself over and over again and very quickly.
Did you say 9 or 10? Those are the 2 numbers that they would be the most likely?
The 2 magic numbers, exactly.
Okay.
So a standard NPS question will ask you, how likely are you to refer Summit CPA to a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? 9s and 10s are what we call promoters. They are your advocates. They are out there shouting about how wonderful you are without being prompted, without you having to pay them any additional dollars. And they're the ones who are going to bring in, a lot of additional referrals. Your 7s and 8s, we call them passives. They're a little ambivalent. They don't love you, they don't hate you, they're less likely to be doing anything, but they present a great opportunity to convert into promoters. So what's that personal touch you can do to push them into that raving fan category? And your detractors, a 0 to 6, are the ones who are going to potentially be actively talking against you. Maybe they're leaving a negative review. Maybe when someone asks them for a recommendation, they're like, well, don't go after this particular Chipotle. Let me tell you, last time I was there, it was not a great experience. And so they're the ones where we really want to catch them and address their concerns before they have an opportunity to go out into the internet or into their friends and family circle. And so when we talk a little bit later about a good feedback program, a lot of the focus is not just on measuring, but what do you do with this information? Right? How do you actually make sure that the promoters are being leveraged? And how do you make sure your detractors are being addressed before things spiral out of control? So moving forward, we'll touch on each of those in a lot more detail throughout this session. But what you can see is that customer experience is become more and more important over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. You're now seeing a lot more customer experience officers or chief customer officers. People are recognizing that this is not just important from a retention or revenue perspective, but also an employee perspective. So this has become one of the key initiatives in order to be able to really increase the overall top line, as well as reduce inefficiencies through things like employee turnover.
Hey, Max, I'm going to go ahead and launch the first polling question for people, and then you can just go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so, that's been launched.
Thank you. So when we go on to the next slide, the reason this seminar is called The 7 Habits is we've come up with 7 key attributes to be able to run a successful customer experience program. And I'll go through each of those, but they're really focused around how do you measure and how do you figure out what to measure on in terms of your customer experience? How do you share that information with your team? Spoiler alert, historically, a lot of customer feedback has been collected, shared with management, generating big reports of like, oh yes, NPS for this quarter was 42, which is okay, but it's a 3-point decrease from last quarter. What are we going to do about it? What we found, that's not as effective. So we believe that getting a real-time feedback into the hands of the people who are working with your customers is one of the most important elements of being able to improve your customer experience program. Because for the people who are interacting with your customers on a daily basis, if they don't know what is good or bad about the overall customer experience, they can't do anything about it. So that's really steps 1, 2, and 3. How do you set a standard about what is good? How do you focus your team on knowing how they're performing against each of their standards and making sure they can focus on one small thing to do better every day or every week? And how do you get that feedback back into the front line?
Nice. So we got the survey results back, MX, and but the majority of what's the math there, Tom? Over 50%
Yeah,
are 10 and under the
Yeah, so
size of their firm.
59%. Yeah.
So probably, most people here that are watching are the frontline people,
yeah,
or are. Oh, thank you. So yeah, so 15%, 2 to 10, 44%, and even the 11 to 25%. Probably a great majority of people are the frontline people, or are working directly with those frontline
right.
people.
Yes.
And I mean, that's great. I feel like when you're at a smaller organization where the manager, so to speak, in the front line, in your case, your accountants and your senior accountants, and maybe, I don't know, even your receptionists and front desk staff are
Yeah,
all
good point.
involved in it. It's much easier to know what good looks like, right? Because you're there, you're sitting, well, in pre-COVID days, but you're sitting there in an office and you can hear how John is talking to the customer. You can see that reaction come through. And so a lot of this can happen organically. I see there's also, a quarter of the respondents who have larger firms. And this is where it gets trickier because you can't be in every interaction. You're not going to sit in every customer call or every customer appointment. So how do you make sure that feedback is getting collected as well as being shared back with the rest of your team? One of the things I want to call out, because we'll talk about a bit more detail, is item 4, which is recognizing every achievement. There's been a lot of research in behavioral economics and psychology of how people are motivated to change their behavior. And one of the things that is a common thread is that positive reinforcement of good behavior is a significantly stronger motivator than criticism or focusing solely on poor performance. And so we believe in catching people doing things right in real time. And you guys probably know better than I, there's almost nothing better than hearing directly from the customer, man, I loved working with Tom. He was so great. He was so responsive. And it just gives not just Tom, but his entire team that little boost of endorphin to be like, oh yeah, you know what, I went above and beyond for this customer and I took a couple of late calls, but it's all worth it because they're happy and I am now motivated to do that. I'm not saying that everyone should be taking 6 p.m., 10 p.m. calls,
Sure.
but as an example. And I love when my customers write into me and say, look, I just want to let you know that this person on your team has wowed me. We share that internally with the entire team, and it's a sense of appreciation. I think that can really get lost when you just focus on what can we do better. That's not to say we're not going to focus on that, but we want to focus on one thing. So, if I sat down with my team members, like, here are the 16 different things that we could work with you on, off you go, it's overwhelming and it feels not constructive. So how can we focus on one thing and not just that, but recognize the achievement for it? And then 6 and 7 are really about how do we ensure that everyone in the organization understands how they fit into the bottom line. And the bottom line can be overall business outcomes, right? Because at the end of the day, employees are part of the business. They may have a direct or an indirect stake in the business, but helping them understand that this is what we're trying to do as an organization, and here is how you fit in. That creates a lot more engagement and motivation. And it also helps them understand how their behavior directly impacts the overall well-being of the organization, rather than creating an us and them dynamic. Unmuting the front line is almost a result of all of these. And especially in the smaller organizations, I would assume that a lot of you are already doing this. You're listening to your team about what is going well, what needs to change. But really, they're the ones out there speaking to the customers day in, day out. And they're the ones who have probably a lot of insight and knowledge that they are not, they don't always have the ability to change systemically, but can provide a new and alternative view or some great refreshing solutions.
That feels like the step that sort of completes it into a cycle, doesn't it? Right? Once you've heard, you have that chance to say, what do we think we'll do differently, and let that feedback in by listening to people to make suggestions.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point. That's the frontline worker, the people who are interacting with their customers have not traditionally been involved in that solutionizing process. And so it's often, you collect the feedback, you think about it, you share the feedback back out sometimes with your team, but it's like, oh, let me tell you what we're going to do about it, rather than help me understand what we can do about it. If you have that process, not only do you get a diversity of ideas, you get people who are bought into the outcome. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to do this because I think it's a good idea and I can help come up with that, and I'm going to own part of that initiative. So if we go forward, we did a poll of a couple of hundred, I think 300 companies across the industry, and found that mastering 4 of these elements are going to be the most integral in driving your overall business impact. 1 is setting your standard. 2 is tracking and sharing and acting on that feedback. 3, being empowering, rewarding that frontline employee, so your accountants and the people who are interacting with your customers, and then personalizing coaching. If you are able to do all 4 of those things, you move on to the next slide, we found that there is not just significant impact on customer satisfaction, but directly on revenue and efficiency. So companies that do well in these 4 areas see a 60% plus increase in their bottom line. So it's not just a feel-good, fluffy statistic, it directly impacts how quickly your organization can grow.
I was going to say, now you're speaking everyone's language, right? Everyone's going,
exactly.
That sounds fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got it in numbers.
Exactly. I mean, my accounting experience was trying to learn accounting 101 back at business school, but I was an accounting TA for a little second until they realized that I didn't really know what I was talking about, so I pivoted quickly out of that field. But it's numbers. And what I'm finding, is that more and more companies are actually able to quantify CX investment. In an ideal state, you're able to say, hey, if we can increase NPS, for example, by X number of points, then that should correlate with an X number of point percentage increase in revenue or in referrals or in retention. And what that does, it helps prioritize CX initiatives in the same way that you can prove ROI for a new system that might increase efficiency. And it helps put CX up in the forefront of when you're trying to weigh out what we do in a particular month or quarter, right? Everyone's resources are scarce. And so this can help identify the actual impact of something to do with why would we start a feedback program, or why would we start an employee reward or recognition program? Hey, because there's value here.
And MX, if people are wondering what a good NPS score is, there's some pretty good benchmark data to be able to say, if you were to collect this, how do I stack up compared to what other companies are doing?
Exactly. And that's why we definitely recommend using NPS, because it is an industry and cross-industry standard. There are lots of other metrics out there, CSAT and 5-star. Those are generally used for slightly different interactions, right? It's more about, oh, I called up a customer support line. How were they in helping me resolve my question? But NPS looks at your company holistically, because a company could have a great experience with their billing agent. A customer could have had a great experience with their call center agent, but they still might leave you because of the overall perception of the company. So it's important to ask about the overall perception, and that they can then, there's a lot of research out there to quantify the impact of NPS. You can compare yourself to different companies by size, by industry, by where you are. If you're a less than $5-10 million company versus a $10 to $50 million company. I would say professional experience as professional services organizations like accountants generally have a higher NPS, especially if you're working with your clients for a while, and you're going to get a higher level of engagement. And often we see response rates of, say, 20-30% plus for these type of organizations, and with NPS scores ranging anywhere from 30 to 50 plus all the way up to like a 60-70 mark. Keeping in mind, NPS goes from negative 100 to 100. So if you're positive, you're already doing pretty well.
Yeah, I have this on our About Us page. We show our NPS score, and I have in there the standard in the accounting industry is 24. So that's the standard. I think ours needs to be updated, but we typically are in the 70 to 80 range, mid 70 to mid 80. but 24 is typical. And I think, I mean, it's still, like you said, it's still positive, but I think for accountants, I mean, when you're doing somebody's taxes and they owe money, sometimes they're not
Right.
going to like you, right? Like so
Yeah.
I think for Summit, we build that relationship with our clients over time. It's not just a once a year, we do your taxes, now you owe us money and the government money, but like we're taking care of clients all year round. And that's one of the ways that that we serve our clients. So I don't know, I don't know if you could speak to the 24, but it seems like that may be kind of a factor for accounting companies, firms, that they're not necessarily working with their clients all the time. So, you know, that's still a good number, but maybe not as high as it could be.
Yeah, accountants, I mean, you guys are in a tough spot, right? People come to you, it's something that they have to do. And so it's not like they're coming to you for a relaxing massage or something which is a not self-indulgent, and shouldn't say that. Self-care is very important, but it's something that, you know, they do need to maintain, and things go wrong. People get outcomes that they don't necessarily agree with, which is why we also see so lower scores for things like insurance companies. You know, people get their claim denied and they're like, hang on a second, this is terrible, even though they've had a great experience with the individual agents. So benchmarks are important, but I always like to say a great NPS score is one that was better than the week before. So it's important to set your standard for your own company and then set a goal to increase. And if you're moving from -50 to -20, that is a huge win. And we want you to celebrate that, and we want you to know that this is not an easy thing to do. Is there room to grow? Of course. But that, you know, that you're not always going to be comparing apples to apples, because there's going to be the type of ongoing familial relationships with some of your family where you do a lot of these add-on services, which isn't just at tax time, versus a more transactional, you know, come April 16th, I think it is, in this company, or more likely April 15th at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, like, oh dear, I need to call someone and see if they can fit me in, and I'll get annoyed if they can't fit me in.
Right.
Yeah. So
on to the next.
have a look at the benchmarks, and I'm happy to share, you know, some information. I'm also happy to share this slide deck after the call, but keep in mind that it will be different for you, and it will be more of a let's go for 3 months. I tell my clients, let's run the program for 3 months and see where we shake out, and then set a target of where we want to go, rather than going, I'm going to set a target of 70, and in the first 3 months maybe I'm at 50, which is a great score, but then it feels like a failure, right? Because we've set this target that isn't necessarily realistic for what that is. And more importantly, it's about the action and the insights that you take, not the score itself. The score is a reflection of your customers' loyalty. It is not the driver. And changing the score and finding ways to increase that is not going to help the underlying issues that may be reflected in there. So additional engagement, and when we talk about the feedback portion, that's really going to be critical here, because once you address those underlying components, that's when we can see, as a result of that action, the score will increase. So if we move into the service standards, as you might recall, that was item 1. Service standards are step 1, because if you don't know what good looks like, you can't work towards it, you can't measure it, and you can't engage your team to do towards that. So I have here a couple of do's and don'ts on that, and I'll give people a second to read it.
And then in about 30 seconds, I'll go ahead and launch the next poll question, if that's okay. Okay.
Of course. And service standards are about behaviors. I've put this here as Zoom Care. That's a local urgent care center, series of urgent care centers in the Pacific Northwest. And to be honest, no one has a good experience at urgent care. You know, you don't go in because you're like, I've got a lazy Saturday afternoon that I want to spend for 3 hours sitting in a waiting room with 14 other screaming babies, but you've got to do it. What Zoom Care is trying to do is reduce those moments of friction throughout that process, so that if you do have to go, it is a pleasant experience. I've been there a bunch of times and I love what they do. Even things like you can make appointments. You can start with telehealth. There is an ongoing record that even if you've gone once, you can access that information. They have immediate referrals either in-house or externally to additional work, lab work, whatever that might be. And they're personal. Someone greets you in the front, they tell you what to expect, they follow up with you afterwards and make sure you've gotten the care and gotten your questions answered. And they publish all of this on their front wall as soon as you walk in. They say they want to create the perfect patient experience, the perfect visit, so that from moment one, they want you to know what to expect as a customer. And so that everyone in the organization at Zoom Care, from the front desk check-in person to the nurse, to the doctor, to the person who's drawing my blood, has in mind what good looks like for the customer.
We'll have about 10 seconds and I'm going to close the poll.
Yeah. And so that way, they know what they should be measuring on, and they know what are the key things that make their customers happy. So service standards are something where you might have some already. I'm keen to see the results of the poll when they become available. You might not, you might develop them.
Yep. So they should be able to see the poll results. Does this surprise you? That most of the people don't have things documented? I'm surprised maybe by how many do have them documented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is not surprising, because what we find is that there's not a lot of clear documentation. Sometimes if it is documented, it's not widely known or widely shared or trained upon, right? It's one thing to write it down you go to a leadership offsite and, write that down. And for smaller organizations, getting that documented, it's probably easier for everyone to be bought in. But it's another to constantly reinforce that, measure against it, and also reward against it. So at AskNicely, for example, we have 4 key values: personal, curious, responsive, and simple. And every month we have a kind of Employee of the Month award, but it's centered around these. So it's like, what was a situation in which Kelly or Tom demonstrated behavior that really represented and personified one of these values? And so that is really helping everyone else understand that this is what we're looking for, and this is what we value, and we want to stay true to that, and how we deliver this to our customer. So I think it's great that there's already 30-40% of people who have them documented. I encourage you, for those who do not, to share this out with your team, build it into your onboarding process, and see if there are times throughout your organization's life cycle where you can reward behavior that fits in with these service standards.
Great.
More importantly, so the next slide, we have just a customers of ours who we helped to really understand what are these key things that customers care about. They call it the brand promise. And they started surveying across for these brand promises, started implementing these kind of systems to really personalize coaching and help understand which of these particular brand promises were really being outperformed and those who have been underperformed. And they really started to see, I think, a 7x increase in their referrals as a result of being able to measure, coach, and reward for that. So as I mentioned, setting your service standards is key, because you need to know what good looks like. And what it will also do is help you identify what feedback program you want to do. What questions do you want to ask? Right, so one of the things that we find is that there's not always a lot of systematic feedback programs in place where you get reliable feedback from your customer. And a lot of people also don't really know what to ask. If you've got your service standards set, then you have a much more clear understanding of what you should be asking your customers. We think, I'm not sure if it's the poll coming next or the slide.
I can go ahead and launch the poll if you want, around asking for feedback.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's do that, because I think it'd be super interesting to see.
Okay, that's going on right now.
Right, because we find that feedback for smaller organizations, especially those, with a very ongoing relationship with your customer, there may not be the same kind of need, but as you grow and scale, feedback becomes incredibly important. And you guys probably also see that customers sometimes will tell you things in a survey that they may not say to you face to face. We've definitely had situations where, I've talked to this customer, they seem fine, they're really happy. And then a few months later, they churn. And you're like, oh gosh, what happened? And there's all these things. They're like, yeah, we didn't really feel comfortable talking to you, especially when you're talking to a person. That's the innate human desire not to hurt feelings of somebody else. And so having these kind of feedback programs gives you a much more holistic view and gives the customers an opportunity to provide feedback if they don't really have the opportunity to do so or they don't feel comfortable doing so. Furthermore, it also gives the opportunity to collect feedback from people who aren't necessarily as vocal. We all know the squeaky wheel, and there are probably people who are never shy of telling you what they think. But the important thing is, does this represent the majority of the sentiment out there?
So does this surprise you, MX? I think more collective, maybe what I was thinking, but you've seen this more than I have.
Yeah, it's a little, honestly, I would probably think that with the audience that we have, given that, most of the 50-60% are on the smaller side, it doesn't surprise me. And I think still there is a lot of value, even if you're a smaller organization, to get in the habit of collecting customer feedback. So I'm curious to see, I don't know if we have this ability to cross-reference that with the size of the firm, but
that would be cool.
That would be, we'll do some other stats sharing. But on the next slide, what we've done is we've polled as part of this survey, and you probably isn't a surprise because it kind of measures quite well with the poll here that the majority don't necessarily have a organized, frequent feedback program. And that's really critical. What gets measured gets actioned. And it's not just about the number, like we talked about, but the insight that you get from this feedback. A lot of my customers also use the feedback as an opportunity to re-engage with their clients. When we say, if you think back to the 7 steps, which I'm sure you've all memorized by now, but one of them was, it's not just collecting feedback, but acting on it as well.
Yeah.
So
the results of the poll were very similar to this. I mean, a little bit different, but yeah, very, very similar to what I see.
Yep. And best practice is kind of on that right-hand side that we recommend you collect feedback after key moments in the customer lifecycle. So whether that's just after you completed their taxes or just after you've had a consultation with them, depending on what's, and not necessarily asking about that particular interaction, but that's a moment where your organization is top of mind for them to ask about their perception of the organization more generally. If you haven't had an interaction with them for 3 months and then you send them a survey, they're probably, honestly, not going to respond because they might not think it's that relevant. But if you do catch them at that key moment, it's still fresh in their mind. And that's a really good opportunity to figure out, okay, what's going well, what's not going well. And the more you can relate that feedback to the individual who is delivering that experience, the easier it would be to reward that individual, recognize them, and also coach them. So it seems a little counterintuitive to ask general questions, but tie it to an individual. But for, I think for a firm like an accounting firm, where a customer's perception of your organization is going to be heavily dependent on their interactions with the particular accountant that they're working with, that to them is the interaction, is the overall perception. And so being able to say, hey, Tom, your customers love you for your responsiveness, but they say that, maybe sometimes you can be a little more empathetic, or Kelly, your customers love you because that you know their products inside out and you're very good at giving them all the right information. but sometimes they have to wait maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days before they get a response. And so let's see what we can do about that. It gives the individuals who are viewing this feedback, your employees, the context on their own customers. I'm sure neither of those things are true for either of you. I just had to pick on a couple of people here. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, a feedback program is really about the action that you take. You survey after a moment of truth. You can segment by region or even down to the individual staff level, and you share that feedback out with the front line, right? We have customers that have a TV in their office which just rotates through the most recent customer feedback channels. For those that use Slack or some kind of similar thing, you can get these automatically shared into a Slack channel, or it might even be in part of a weekly stand-up where you're like, hey, this is what we've gotten this week. Here are some customer comments, feedback. You know, Kelly, your customer just absolutely raved about you. That's so great, right? We really can take the moment to appreciate everyone, and then give the overall themes to the company with the entire company. Importantly, take action. Make sure that those who do give you a 5 and say, I've been really frustrated because I haven't been able to get onto anyone, that somebody gets onto them. A customer who is taking the time to respond to your survey is already someone who's a bit more engaged, and it's a courtesy. Feedback is a gift. They've taken time out of their day to answer a couple of questions, which is why we recommend to keep it short. Don't bog them down in 10, 15 different types of questions. There's a couple of things that you can do to get the pulse, but take the time to go back to them, whether it's just by saying thank you, or if there is someone who's a little bit disgruntled, giving them a call or sending them an email, following up with them, because you have an amazing opportunity to turn that detractor into a promoter. We've probably all had experiences, you know, often in the retail or services industry where you had a bad experience, but you call someone up, they're like, I'm really sorry, let me do right by you. Let me fix this. Let me send you a replacement. Let me give you that immediate refund and a replacement. And you come out going, man, they've turned my pretty poor experience into a good one.
Yeah.
And we find that customers who go from detractor to promoter can be even greater advocates for your company than those who are promoters in the first place, because they know you care.
You know, one of the things that we do when we get a score that's less than what we want, I don't remember the exact number, we have 2 account managers that follow up with the customer. And if it's my client, for example, I'm not in that meeting, so the account manager is saying, can you tell us a little bit more and come up with an action plan? But Meng-Xi, I think we found what you have, and then they would sit down and talk to me and we go through that plan. But those customers, I think, just are so happy that I'm able to come back and say, I heard you, here's what we're going to do to fix that, and then come back a few months later and say, are you seeing an improvement? Maybe it was responsiveness to emails. You told us that wasn't great. Are we doing better at that to reinforce that we heard them? I think it's a really important step.
Yeah, 100%. I actually say, if you are not planning to follow up with customer feedback, don't do a survey in the first place. You can do more damage if someone writes in something like that and nobody actually follows up. You're like, well, you've just proven my point.
Yes.
Right? So you can start small. You don't have to survey every single customer at the same time. Do an amount that's manageable, that feels helpful for you. You can start with your most important customers or whatever that might be, just to get into that habit. And you might learn things about what is working well and not working well that you didn't know before, and then you can take action, then survey a few other people. Right? There are lots of ways to go about it without trying to, without having to hire 3 new people. And it's more impactful, honestly, if it's sometimes the people in the business, people who do manage these accounts, who can reach out to give the customer the space to talk about their particular issue.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, getting this feedback to the front line is really important. And this slide, what it shows is that if you can use this customer feedback to motivate your frontline, so by frontline, your team, your accountants, it really helps increase their own satisfaction, their own employee impact, And therefore, they get more bought into the program, they get more bought into the outcomes of what you're trying to drive for and create better results. So we had a customer who is in the real estate industry, and they started rolling out the program where they shared the customer feedback directly with their employees every day. They had weekly stand-ups where each employee was able to talk a little bit about what went well and what didn't well, and everyone knew what was going on in the company. And what they found is that just that ability to see and know what was going on with the customers gave the agents a sense of empowerment and a sense of ownership. So they were able, then they grew their sales because the agents were able to oh, okay, I know what's going on, I can fix this. Or, oh, that's really good insight, let me think about what I can do better next time. And it really is great for creating a culture of feedback, of ownership. And really, we want to get away from saying that a 5 is bad, or everyone, if you don't get 10s and 9s, you're going to be fired, right? That's never the intent. That's why we don't recommend assigning a portion of compensation or a bonus to a score. But rewarding improvement is huge. And getting everyone bought into that is also huge, because you want everyone in your team to be like, oh yeah, I'm invested in the overall score of my company. And I want everyone to be pitching in, and here's how I can contribute to it. So that's the story I was just talking about earlier. And it was really about getting that culture of ownership, of self-improvement, of getting the agents, suddenly they went from, well, it's not my problem, to what score did my customer give me? Oh, is that what they said? That's really interesting. What can we do about it? Right? That's a fundamental culture shift, and it's not always easy. I know organizations can take some time to feel comfortable, especially larger organizations. If you're a small, tight-knit organization, hopefully it should be a bit easier for you. But I encourage you to try doing that with your team, just sharing that and helping them understand that a bad score is not a censure on their performance, but it's an opportunity to improve as a company and as an individual as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So talking about empowerment and culture, both the recognition does have to come at the same time with some coaching and support, right? And we talk about praising publicly and coaching privately. You want to shout wins from the rooftop and post those good company reviews in the all hands and make sure everyone sees it. If there are particular areas where an individual can do better, that's best done through more one-on-one coaching, but also real time. We've kind of all been in a situation where, you don't know what's going on and you have an annual performance review and it's like, really? This happened 6 months ago. What am I supposed to do about it now? And so real-time customer feedback helps a bit more, helps with that real-time coaching discussions. In an ideal state, you want your team members to be able to know what they're doing well and what they could improve on, and also have the resources to be able to work on that. This is why in our survey, we found that people don't feel empowered if they don't have the training. If they feel like, well, you say I'm not doing this well, but I don't know how to do this better. So it's important to give the team the resources to be able to improve their own performance. You can use technology to do it. Yeah, of course.
Can I ask you a question? So for accounting firms, what would you recommend based on some of the survey results, just trying to understand our attendees a little bit, to get that real-time feedback? How often would you recommend serving them? And I don't know if you were going to get into this already, but I'm just wondering for the people that are watching, what would you say, if you're not getting any feedback right now, which was the majority of people, what would be a good place to start? I'm guessing it wouldn't be like every 6 months. You would probably want it more often.
Yeah. So if you've never had a survey before, then I think there's 2 things that I would generally recommend. One is just uploading all your customers and kind of sending them a bit of a blast at a time where they've been interacting with you to some extent, right? So maybe that's just around or just after tax time. And you can send them to get that baseline information in. And then what you can do is if you want to, it kind of depends on your model. If you're interacting with them throughout the year, then sending them a survey no more often than we recommend every 90 to 180 days is something you can do, and you can just put that on a cadence. But if you are not interacting with them throughout the year, then I generally recommend sending a survey to customers after they're first signed up, so after they're onboarded, and then after you have that key interaction with them. Maybe it's a consultation, or maybe you've filed their returns, and then also just before another moment of an interaction. So maybe as a reminder, like before tax time is coming in, then you use that as also a bit of a reminder, like, hey guys, remember us? We had a great time last year. We want to know your feedback, and also keep us in mind when January, February, March, of course, because we're all very organized people, roll around. So in this situation, I think sort of the 2 to 3 times a year seems like the right cadence, especially if they're not, there are some organizations where they speak with their clients every month. But here, if you're interacting with them a couple of times a year, pick those moments after which to survey, as well as a moment even before their key, when they're up for what we would call renewal in the SaaS industry, but when they're coming back up to wanting to interact with your firm again. Does that help?
Great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Meng-Xi, we've got about 2 or 3 more minutes for your part, and then
Okay.
I'll close things out. You ready to jump to the next slide?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
I think we're pretty close. As I mentioned, that coaching, keep that personal, keep that individual, and also reward achievement, right? Don't wait until there's a big, we want to get you from 0 to 10. Applaud the achievement when they get to 3, get to 6, and also applaud behavior. For some people, it takes them a while. And if you see behavior, let's say we're talking about getting back to customers more quickly. If you see behavior, we're like, oh yeah, you responded within a couple of hours. That's awesome. It doesn't have to be formal, just a nice word of encouragement. And then the final slide I have in here is, a lot of this might seem overwhelming. Oh, those arrows came back a bit janky, didn't it? Anyway. It might seem like a lot right now, because we've talked about, you got to measure and you got to act and you got to share it with your frontline and coach them. But taking this one step at a time will help you build out the program. Some organizations, you could probably do all of these steps in 3 months. Some might take years, and that's okay, right? Step 1 is really thinking about what is good and getting that down. And step 2 is really starting to measure that and collecting your customer feedback. If you can get those 2 things, then step 3 and 4 of sharing that with your team becomes a lot more organic, and it becomes a lot more hopefully achievable, because then that's when you start seeing the real change.
Meng-Xi, if someone has, say, a few hundred customers, which many accountants would have that many tax customers, would you recommend when they start doing surveys, they start with a subset and sort of get a process down before sending it out to everyone? Okay.
Exactly. Often starting with, a pilot group or a small segment of customers, because as you say, knowing who's going to respond to them, how you respond, the kind of feedback that you're getting will take time. And if you're a small team, these things do take time. So you don't want to flood all 200 of your customers, get a bunch of great feedback in, then feel overwhelmed in terms of actioning it. So start by sending out a few, and honestly, your customers most of the time will want to provide feedback. The single greatest way to increase response rates, in my experience, is when you speak to a customer, just let them know, hey, you're going to get an email survey from me. I would love to hear your feedback. Please take a moment to fill it out. And they're like, oh, all right, I'll be on the lookout for that, right? And so that's something that is really easy to do without having to change all your systems, and then start small, get that baseline, and then can iterate.
And the one piece of feedback we get I hear frequently from our customers is they like how short our surveys are. I give you one number and I can give you comments if I want. And I've heard a number of times when I click on a survey and it comes up and says you're like on question 1 of a big number, I exit and I'm done. And they're like, the reason I fill it out is because in 15 seconds I can do it and I move on.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really valuable thing. It's nice to understand everything, but you probably won't get response if you try to do too much.
Yeah, you're totally right. We recommend 3 questions. It's the NPS question that everyone gets in the survey, the open comment question, because that's really where the gem is. That's like, you know, somebody with, if taking the time to write a comment. And then the optional question is what we call topics. So it's like, hey, what's the biggest driver of your experience today? Is it XYZ? Or if they gave you a 0 to 6, like, I'm really sorry, what was the biggest driver of your poor experience? Because that way you can quickly get a customer oriented focus on what is and isn't working well. And that's 3 questions. It takes them literally 10 to 15 seconds to fill out. And then they don't have to think about it, but you get most of the data that you already need.
Good. Thank you. This has been really valuable. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay, let me cover a couple of things as we're getting ready to close out here. So if you want to continue learning, we do have the Modern CPA Success Show. You can find this on YouTube. So in this, our accounting director, Jamie Naw, interviews clients, employees, other CPA firms, people with tools. So a great way to get some additional information out there. We love when people want to be connected, and we have a CFO community that is available on Slack. We do have a promotion code if you would like to join this, but a place where you can share information, ask questions, get some updates on different activities and things that we have going on. So we hope people at least check it out, and you can do that for a month free to see if it's something that is of interest to you.
And if I could just add, we
yes.
Oh, I was going to say, we also have a maturity model questionnaire. So if anyone is interested, we'd be happy to share that with you, where you can benchmark your own company's performance along some of these scales across the survey recipients. So I'll share those details with Tom and Kelly afterwards, to the extent anyone is.
We will send a follow-up email tomorrow, so we can include that in there, MX, if that works, and then
Perfect.
Everyone will get it. Great.
That sounds great. So I mentioned that I'm a virtual CFO with Summit. That is one of our big offerings that we have to our clients. So we've put together a playbook to teach anyone who wants to learn how to do this. 15 different modules. It's a pretty intensive course, but it will go through everything that we do with videos, guides, a worksheet program that we want to take people through, that our goal is, as you finish that, you're ready to deliver CFO services to clients. This does come with a free hour of coaching. We also have a weekly fireside chat where other firms call in and we just have a discussion. So it's a great chance for people to tell experiences, what they've tried, what they haven't, and get people's input and advice. You do get a free subscription to that CFO Slack community that I mentioned, also some discounts to software and tools. So a really good resource if delivering CFO services to clients is on one of your goal lists. And if you're saying, I'd rather not do that, I'd rather just join someone who already does that, we are hiring people. And so we would love, if you have interest in Summit CPA Group, sounds interesting to you, please check out our career page to learn more about the different roles that we are hiring for. Yeah. Kelly and MX, thank you very much. This is really valuable today. I knew the things that we were doing, but I've learned an awful lot myself, and I hope that our listeners did today too.
Yeah, thank you, MX. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.